Hey everyone, good morning. I'm Gusso, and I work at Wise with design tools. And when I open Figma, this is what I see. My aim might be to design a product screen or use the vector tools to draw a bird or something. And if you're working on your product, this is also what Figma looks like for you. And that's because Figma is not a tool to design Wise specifically. It's a tool to design anything. And it does specialize in products and design systems, but even so, there is a large gap between this anything that you can do on Figma and getting to a product screen. And the product screen really is the bread and butter of product design. It's where you understand the idea, it's what the user sees, you use them in prototypes to make things really realistic. And they're often used in marketing as well. But putting them together accurately is really slow and hard. So let's break down what makes like a perfect product screen. So first, you're going to have the device frame. Here, I use the device, but you don't need to be as fancy. You can just have a rectangle or a rounded rectangle. But you need to decide which device frame you're going to use. Then you have the OS elements, the parts of the operating system that are always there. You need to decide which platform and what version of the platform you're going to use. Then you have the components, the actual content of the screen that you're putting together. Then you add the spacing between those components, which is going to decide how the content flows. And then there's the structure around all this, which can be done in a lot of different ways. And you can use auto layout for everything, for some things. And navigating all of these parts of putting an accurate screen together is something that you are only able to achieve if you're an experienced designer. And it's a lot harder for more junior designers or people that are not using Figma every day. And that's because Figma is this blank canvas. So I think that there's an opportunity to make it more focused into what you're aiming to do. And that happens a lot in the world of gaming, where this is a lot more common. So they also have their blank canvas tools, but it's also a lot more common there for them to create their own tools to create their games throughout the process. So this is an example of a level editor of Geometry Dash, which is a version made for people. And then there's this example of Super Mario Maker 2, a game that is built all around this concept of shipping the internal tool that they make for designing levels for a lot of their games. Obviously, a much more polished version than what they have internally, I assume. And there's a lot of nice examples of these types of internal toolings at GDC Talks, the game developer conference that happens yearly. This is an example of a quest designer for Fortnite. And Eric is a big defender of designers making their own tools. Because by encouraging designers to build the things that are solving their own problems, it frees engineers to work on a lot more complex stuff that they wouldn't be able to achieve. And the barrier of entry for creating small tools to fixing your own problems is decreasing exponentially right now. This other talk by Catherine Neal touches on a lot of similar topics. She's also a designer. She's a narrative designer that builds her own tools for her and her team. And she explains that her goal in making tools is to create a safe space for your design moves. And she explains that by adding very clear constraints to a tool, it gives your brain the permission to draw inside or outside the line. By making something really restrictive, it actually encourages you to go beyond the restriction whenever you want. It makes it more conscious. And these tools that they're talking about, they're not appropriate for every situation. And obviously, the smaller the team, the less that will be relevant a lot of the time. But if you decide that this does apply for your situation, you spotted a problem that could be solved by just putting together a little tool, maybe a Figma plugin, how can you find someone that builds that? And I mean, I've hinted to this before, but I think that person should be you. You are going to build it. And I mean, it doesn't really have to be you, but if you have a niche, now is a really good time. So I'm going to take a break and give you oh, never mind. Hold on. It should be you because you know the problem. You spotted it, so you can take a lot of shortcuts that you normally can't take when designing a product for other people because you have that deep intuition of the problem that you're trying to solve. As you're trying to solve it, you're just constantly consulting yourself on your mind if this is solving the problem in a good way. And obviously, talking to other people is massively important as well, but you can just skip a lot of steps and move really quickly. And now, if I am convincing some of you to try, some of you that have never coded, let me give you a very quick 3-step starting guide to code. So the first one, I already said, you need to come up with a problem to fix. If you don't have a problem to fix, going to just a coding course, particularly for me, has never worked. I've always dropped them. I've talked to other people that said the same. And you can definitely do a little course to just get you over the initial hump, but I feel like just trying to create things on your own is usually more successful because you kick off that motivation loop quicker because you already built something for yourself that's useful. Then you're going to start copying a lot of code from the internet, which is a lot easier now with LLMs because they just assemble all pieces of code of the internet in something that works for your specific scenario. So people are flying now by using LLMs to start into code because you can just get a bunch of code even if you don't understand it. And not understanding is actually something I recommend. The third step is letting go. You're going to have a bunch of lines that you have no clue what they do. But if you worry about understanding what every single comma means, you're going to be too stuck on the process of learning and not start the motivation loop of having built something that will really get you to eventually learn all those things. If you code for enough time, you're going to get all those things. You can then do some courses. But yeah. Just a moment. And I know that it's easy for me to be here and argue that designers should code, because I do, so I'm already past the hump. But I think that it's really beneficial when you're in a company to have at least a couple of people that are in this in-between between design and engineering, because I think it unlocks a lot of the conversation that is sometimes not there. And one of the main ones is about precision. And precision exists in every discipline, but it's necessary for engineering because your goal when you're building a product is to build something with as few bugs as possible. And the more precision you have, the less bugs you have. And there is definitely precision in design as well, but it's a lot blurrier. It's a lot more forgiving. If an app crashes or freezes, everyone knows that the app was wrong. And when the designer is misaligning something or the experience is a little flawed, sometimes they blame themselves. It's usually a matter of opinion as well. So things are a lot more blurrier when you're trying to be precise in design. And I think a lot of friction comes from this between design and engineering, because engineers want designers to meet them on the precision level and give them a lot of answers that designers sometimes don't want to do because they claim that their biggest time sink should be on exploration, on dreaming new ideas. So I think that it's definitely valuable for designers to stretch themselves a little bit more into the technical, because we are all building software. But if you're not that person, that is also extremely okay. It's okay. Designers don't need to code. It is definitely optional. The design discipline, there's room for designers of all shapes in the design discipline, and you can find other partners that can meet you halfway and will love to do the more technical part of design. This is very common with front-end engineers, right? And it's definitely okay not to code, and we should all strive to find things that make us really happy at work. And I fought really hard to get to that point, and I am extremely happy at work right now, so I really encourage it. And one of my favorite aspects about coding is the feeling of comfort that I get from it. There are a lot of systems in coding that make me feel really safe. And the first example is that I can pick at any point to stop this little piece of code, freeze it in time, and generate a lot of variations of it, and just rename things a lot and change what I'm actually creating. But then you have that safety of having that original thing just frozen there looking back at you, and you can compare at any time all the differences between that moment you froze in time and what you're exploring. That gives you a lot of confidence. And you might be thinking that, yeah, but Figma also has this freezing in time moment, and it does with version history. But the key thing is that you can't really see the difference between what changed. And I mean, you sort of can with branch review, but if you've used this feature, I'm sure that you've seen some problems with it. For me, it seems like there hasn't been a lot of activity since it shipped. And I see this stuff very often, where they're telling me that something changed, but I don't know what changed. And then they have this line here that drives me insane. Position, rotation, or scale changed. Like, Figma obviously knows what changed. They know the before and after. But they're not even telling me which of these three changed. So I don't know if it's a coding constraint or if it's just they don't want to focus on displaying all that information. But I think that there's definitely something in this area that is not working, because it brings me the opposite of comfort. They're giving me a tool that I feel really inept to help the people that trusted me to reveal their design. And now I'm looking through this lens, and everything is blurry, and I don't feel like I can be precise with my feedback. Another thing that gives me a lot of comfort in the coding world is this tool called Prettier, which I absolutely love. Let me show you how it works. So if you have a piece of code, it can be styled in many different ways. So you can change the indentation level. You can change the kinds of separation you do for function arguments. You can make things really compact if you want. And all of this is correct code. It all works. These are all stylistic decisions on how you code. And when you use Prettier, it always snaps back to a pre-agreed set of styles that you and your team decides. And so they control the indentation. They control all of those things. And you can customize things if you want, but they discourage it, because that's just something that you don't need to talk about all the time. And they have this big tagline, no need to discuss style in code review. By using a tool that concentrates all of those decisions, you open space to discuss the things that really matter, and not if you are going to add the last optional comma in a JavaScript object. And style, in this sense, is the way that you build things, is not the visual style. So in the design side, style are a lot of these things as well. Like, there are many ways to express the same screen using different structures. You can have detached components or attached components. You can have a lot of this same similar outcome here with a different set of styles. And one tool that I built with this principle was PropStar, a plugin for Figma that tackles labeling components in the canvas. So a few years ago, it started becoming very common practice to have a component set like this and documenting all the property labels in the canvas. And people started doing it in all different ways. Lots of different styles, fonts, and colors, and spacing. And a lot of those things were, people were spending time on making those decisions when I don't think anyone really wanted to. They just wanted to document those things. So my aim was to sort of have a principle similar to Prettier, where I wanted things to feel as native as possible, to just encourage people to accept it and let go, and not really fuss around with this too much. So, which is also a principle that Prettier has. So I avoided this for as much as I could, but then earlier this year I caved and I released the first set of settings. But also with that principle that you can save that on a team level. So you can't really do that on Figma for a whole team, but you can do that for file. So you can store all your changes to how those tables should look on a file level. So anyone using that file will get the same results by putting properties on components. And my new project is called Beam, which is a tool that helps people put together product screens without having to worry about all those style decisions. It centralizes all those styles within the tool. So, and it's also very precise because everything is predefined for you, and it makes it much quicker and easier, even for people that don't use Figma all the time. So let me show you a little bit how it works by recreating the screenshot from the Wise app. So you open Beam, you press to create a new screen, and you get this empty canvas. And at the top there, you can customize a lot of the visual aspects, the stylistic decisions of the screen. Like you can show a device bezel if you want. You can set it to dark mode. And then when we get to the properties of the screen itself, you can put the title, which will insert the title at exactly the right distance and font. And then let's start adding some content. So the first thing, I add a section, which is how we group components wise. And then if we add a navigation option inside the section, you're going to see that it is the same component that is being used on the screenshot. But now we hit a bit of a roadblock where getting that to look like a balance, you need to take a bunch of steps. You need to find a flag. You need to associate it with the right currency name. So there's a lot of work in that PM, for example, might struggle a little bit on Figma. So Beam has this concept of content types, where when you select a component, you can select a balance, and it's going to pre-populate with a random balance with the matching flag and currency. And if you press the plus button, you can get a list of unique balances within this component group. And if we go back to Beam and disable the device bezel, you can see that this looks pretty much exactly like the screenshot. So it is very precise. And now you can close Beam and do whatever you want. Like Beam aims to build a screen for you in a very precise way, but you can close Beam at any time and try things and try components that are not in the design system and just go crazy. And by removing all of the style decisions, you just made this process exponentially quicker. So we launched Beam to designers in May, and there's been quite a lot of usage. This is the amount of changes that designers made to a screen using Beam. So this is every time a toggle has been switched, or a component has been added, or removed, or reordered, anything that you can do in Beam. And if you consider that every property change would involve up to like 5 clicks on Figma and looking at different parts of the screen, you can see how this saves a bunch of time. And we just launched the content types, the stuff that customizes balances last week. And that's when we decided to announce Beam to the whole org. And there's been a lot of excitement for it, especially from PMs and engineers that felt that they were inept to express their vision on Figma because they just didn't understand the tool very well. And designers can use Beam to put together a screen in like under a minute. Engineers and PMs can take a little bit more, like 4, like for the first time. But still, like they would take up to 30 minutes. Like it takes people a long time to try to put together something like that. And it wouldn't be as accurate because they just don't have the eye to focus on all of those aspects that make something accurate. So Beam brings us closer to that vision of making Figma a place to design-wise and to be optimized to do the things that we do every day without just being that empty canvas. And it also brings the comfort of the tools like Prettier, because style decisions are not things that you need to worry all the time. And there's a lot less cognitive load to put something together. And you're not relying on finding a screen from another designer that someone might have accidentally removed auto layout from something. And it also moves design closer to engineering because it's made for precision, but within this free design tool where you can do anything you want. And I think that if we keep optimizing this process of building the obvious screens as fast as we can, we're opening up the space in our minds and calendars to just be creative and have that blurry design time. And the fact that the gaming industry subscribes to a similar model gives me the confidence that this is not really removing creativity, because they're one of the most creative industries there is, right? So that's it. Thank you.